Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm joined here today by Dr. Dan Maggs, you'll know Dr. Dan, Primal Doctor, and Anna Pinkerton. Anna, thank you very much for joining us. Anna is a renowned psychotherapist and founder of a corporation called Kindness Incorporated. I love that name.
Thank you.
So talk to people first and foremost, tell me about yourself and Kindness Incorporated.
Okay, I've been a psychotherapist for 25 years, and I specialised in post-traumatic stress for 18 years. And on my 18th year of practice, I ended up with PTSD myself.
Wow.
And Kindness Incorporated really came out of the journey of recovery that I had to discover, because I really hit rock bottom. And in the 2 years after the PTSD, I kind of discovered all of the elements that were required for recovery. And it was a bit of a marriage of my personal and professional life, really. And so I've now done 25 years.
Wow.
And been with people in their darkest times for 29,000 hours. And
29,000 hours?
Yeah,
wow.
Over the years, yeah.
Does that tend to have a sort of an impact on you? Is it quite, as a psychotherapist and somebody in your profession, is it quite a dangerous territory sometimes when you're around people and obviously you're trying to help people that are in quite dark places? Does that rub off on you?
It can do. I think you kind of get practiced at not absorbing it. And people ask me that question a lot, and it's a really good question, because it's hard to understand that you can hear the very worst part of life, really. I mean, I've heard of the most awful
things,
human atrocities that one person will do to another. But on the other hand, I also hear those stories of strength of people. What people can overcome is incredible as well.
Yeah.
And over the years, I kind of taught myself to not absorb it, because if I absorb what I'm listening to, I become part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Yeah.
So it's...
You have a responsibility, don't you, to others
You kind of, you have to end up just almost like funneling it. You feel it, and then you kind of move through it as quickly as you can, so that you can help that person.
It's a process of compartmentalisation that you kind of have to sort of put things in compartments sometimes and just leave them, or literally just filter them out.
Oh, I just filter it really quickly because I just hear too much bad stuff. Yeah.
That's a skill though, because some people aren't capable of doing that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think to be honest, I think psychotherapy kind of would, on the whole, probably attract people that can put things in boxes.
Yes.
But you actually become ill yourself. You'd end up having vicarious traumatisation if you continue to do that.
Vicarious traumatisation, just for anybody that doesn't know.
That means,
break that down for me.
like trauma is like a contagion. You actually would pick it up. It's like it's also called secondary trauma. So if you're working with trauma a lot, you can become traumatised yourself. So you have to actively process it in the moment if you can, or certainly within minutes of the session that you're with somebody, and then you can move on.
Dan, that's something I find, I know you're about to say something, that's something I find fascinating about doctors in general. I mean, I deal with a lot of oncologists and haematologists in my own work aside from Primal Cure, and having met a lot of medical professionals, you obviously have to, there's a lot of positive things you do, but also you have to deliver a lot of bad news. You have to sort of, and that can be quite, especially, I always think for doctors that are working with young children, especially, who are giving terminal diagnoses and stuff, is that difficult to deal with? I know obviously you've worked as a GP, but what's your experience in that department?
Well, thankfully I've never worked in paediatrics where I've had to give that kind of a diagnosis where there's been young children involved, but I do a lot of work with palliative care, so a lot of dying adults.
Of course,
and sorry,
that's fine.
Some dying adults and stuff, and so that's quite a common part of our work. It's quite difficult, but you've got, I always think you've got two ways of viewing it. You can either view it as, this is a, really terrible thing, or you can say, well, this is my chance to help someone maintain their dignity and help them have a death that's pain-free or free from distress, things like that. And actually, you do a lot of help for the family in those situations as well, and you're really helping. Almost the grieving process is almost starting before they've passed away, and and we know that people who witness a family member dying, when they're in a lot of pain or in a lot of trauma, have a much more difficult recovery in terms of their own grieving process. So actually, it's quite rewarding work, but it is very difficult sometimes to balance that being caring and listening and wanting to help people, but also looking after yourself as well, because you know you don't want to be so cut off that you lack empathy, because people don't respond to you as a clinician if you lack empathy.
What you call it bedside manner in some instances, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. But also you can't take on everybody's problems. I mean, you will see people. I mean, my work's very different from Anna's, but we see people who are having, you know, very traumatic life events and, you know, compounding lots of different things going on in their lives. But you know, and we're naturally as doctors and health professionals, we want to help people. But one of the things I learned fairly early on is you can't solve everybody's problems all of the time.
Sure.
You can't dive into it.
Yeah, and you can't take that home with you. And unfortunately, you know, you'd love to be able to help sort everybody else's problems and everybody's lives out. You just can't do it. It's not possible.
But you know, in terms of actually that, you know, that sort of bedside manner, if you like, and obviously in medical school, did you actually get the I don't know, is there any sort of, what sort of training do you guys get? This is something I actually wondered for quite a while. What sort of training do you guys get in terms of, you know, patient care and, I guess, you know, how to deliver messages? I mean, it comes down to social skills, really, which not everybody's born with.
Yeah, but I think it's something that's selected for in the process of getting into medical school, is having good communication skills. And certainly one of the pieces of advice for, you know, students, you know, A-level students or people who are looking to get into medical school is show some evidence of good communication skills on your application form. Go and do something that requires good communication skills. You know, working in the checkouts at a supermarket where you're actually engaging new people all the time is often said to be a really great way of developing communication skills. And you probably noticed that the guys and the ladies and gentlemen who work on the tills typically have actually got really good people skills.
Generally, they're always very chatty.
That's
some more than others.
Some more than others, yeah, definitely. But you know, that's a really great thing, and it's definitely selected for on the way into medical school. But through medical school, you know, I started communication skills training pretty much from the first week. You know, it's such a core part of the job. I mean,
as a patient, as somebody obviously who's been in it, as you know, and as some of you guys at home might know, who's been in and around, you know, medical care through a big portion of her life, I find that the doctor-patient relationship and that, without getting too close, just how to deliver news to people, how to be amiable, how to be friendly, how to be relaxed around people, is something that's, well, it's either very prominent one way or the other. Sometimes it's very lacking. I don't know, that's obviously something that, like I say, some people are born with or they're not, I guess. Is it not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you can nurture those skills to a certain amount, but I think you know, if it's not naturally innate within you, then it can be really difficult. And actually, we start to see different ways in different cultures of how people engage with their doctors and things like that. Other parts of the world, they have a much more what we'd call a paternalistic model of healthcare, which is you've got these symptoms, you take this medication. Whereas actually healthcare in the UK has hopefully moved on to much more what we call a patient-centred approach, which is you've come in with these symptoms, here's what I think's going on, I've got these different options for you, let's lay them out, these are the risks and benefits of each of them. How do you feel about those different options? What would you like? So it's, you know, you hear the dialogue's very, very different. It's much more involved, and actually we know through a lot of studying and stuff that people get a lot better outcomes, there's a lot better relationship with people, you know, and very much, you know, a lot of the horror stories that we hear, you know, that I hear as a patient, I hear as a doctor from patients who are coming back, or from other people I talk to, is when that kind of communication really breaks down. Or I went to see, you know, one of my friends, Gemma, who runs the psoriasis podcast. She tells a great story about how, you know, she went into her dermatologist and she's a very educated lady, you know, a scientist by training, and went in to try and have a really good conversation with her dermatologist, but decided the dermatologist barely looked up from his prescription pad as he wrote a prescription saying, you need this, take this away. it's just not. It's just not that. It's just not communication. There was no communication there. It was one way from doctor to patient. Whereas nowadays we hopefully try to have as much two-way conversation as possible. Really.
I think you just mentioned dialogue there and communication. I mean, your profession's all about communication and dialogue, isn't it, Anna? Just from a psychotherapy point of view, for people who aren't aware at home, what is your role as a psychotherapist, and what sort of people do you deal with at Kindness Incorporated? What's your client base?
My client base are mostly business owners or managers. And
people with responsibility.
Huge responsibility, often many staff. So, but really anybody from around 10 staff to thousands of staff. So, and the reason I tend to see those kinds of people, it's all word of mouth.
Yeah. So they come to you rather than be referred. They tend to you.
Usually, and they're usually at the worst time of their lives. So they've hit rock bottom through burnout or breakdown. Now, there's two ways that they will find their way to me. One is whether they've had a drip effect of stress over many months and years, and then there's suddenly a rupture in their mental or physical health. So they're usually incredibly strong people, incredibly motivated and committed people. So often then the experience of the rupture, whether it's mental or physical or both, is massive to them because they are used to extending themselves beyond their human limits, and they're used to being able to dig deep consistently, but it's that very consistent extension of their limits that actually causes the break. And then the other kind of...
So like walking a tightrope and it's only a matter of time before they're going to slip.
Yeah, I mean, that's my belief from my experience, is that really nobody gets away with it. So I do say to people, look, if you don't take care now, your mind or your body will take you down. So if you can become self-caring enough now, you might prevent that from happening, because prevention is really everything, right?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we always say, I always say it, but Primal Cure by name, prevention by nature. That's what we always say. We're all about prevention here at Primal Cure. We think that there's far too much, my own personal opinion is there's far too much over-medication in society these days, and people are far too quick to reach for a prescription or something to try and solve something, rather than actually think about what's at the source of the problem and what might have got them to that point. And a lot of these, and we know obviously that what's on the front cover of the Primal Cure book, for example, all these diseases, these illnesses, these ailments, whether it be mental illness, whether it be heart disease, diabetes, cancer, they all have preventable elements to them. As a colleague of ours, Dr. Shan, says. Just talking about, you talked about burnout there, which I know is something you specialise in great depth. We'll talk about it in more detail in a minute. But just stress as on the whole, do you think now that, I mean, I don't know, are people just more aware of stress, as it were, or is society basically, the side of the world we live in, the environment we live in, is that more conducive to stress?
Yes and yes.
Probably not worded very well, but you know what I was going to say.
I think my feeling is that we talk about stress as though it's a thing in itself, like it's an entity that we walk into it. We walk into this blob of stress and we experience it. What we don't tend to talk about is that it's created within us.
Okay.
So although we can pick up like vibes and things can get transferred from one person to another, stress on the whole is something that we absorb, then we decide what we're going to do with it. The other thing is, in my experience, is that stress affects just about every system in the body. And so it's not just it creates a headache or it stops us absorbing our food. It affects every system.
Sure.
So like, almost nothing gets away with it. And of course, the longer you're in that state, the more that becomes considered normal. And I think that's what we've done in this country.
We've normalised it.
And actually, it's not normal. And interestingly, in the 80s, we were told this will be the age of leisure, and in fact, it's not. Well, yeah, I'm way older than you.
That wasn't, by the way, there was no way to do.
That was him saying, how old are you?
No, it wasn't. I wasn't aware. Is that seriously what people thought that in the 80s?
We had people come to our school in the early 80s telling us this would be the age of leisure.
Wow.
And so they taught us all about deferred gratification because we would be working like a 20-hour week, right? Well, that's not transpired, funnily enough, for lots of reasons. But yeah, the assimilating of stress as normal is a huge problem. So I'm a big believer in that we can help people look, how much do you take on? How does sorry.
I was just going to say, you just talk about, the time of leisure and all the rest of it. We all enjoy leisure, but then, should just pure leisure be something we're all aspiring to, or is that something that's indicative of something else? Because I personally, I like to work.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm driven to do something. That's my mentality,
Same, but if your drive is creating adrenaline, cortisol, and whatever other stress hormones zooming through your system consistently, that's not going to do you any good in the long run.
Okay.
So
there's a healthy balance to be struck, isn't there, as with everything? Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a lot of drive and motivation, but I do it with such ease now. Whereas once upon a time, I'd have been that person.
Gotcha.
Like, right, I've got to bash this project out, or I've got to go and do this, or I've got to do that. Whereas actually,
you just do it.
The core of me is so much more quiet and easy. So the drive hasn't gone, but people worry about that, frankly. Clients of mine worry that if they deal with their stress, they deal with their relationships from themselves, their motivation and drive will go. But it doesn't go, it's just easier.
Yeah. Balance has to fall into place, doesn't it?
What do you think about the idea of this work-life balance? Because it's a term that we use all the time. It's frequently
It's unique
everywhere.
to every individual, isn't it, work-life balance? It's a really good question, Dan.
But my understanding is that this term of work-life balance really only appeared in the last 20, maybe 20, 30 years, and didn't used to be a term that we used to use. Do you think there is such a thing as work-life balance, truly balancing these things? Because I actually relate quite a lot to what you say about this, having this passion for working and things like that, and actually balancing that out can be quite tricky sometimes.
It's actually, you just used a key word there, Dan. I think it's passion, and I mean, obviously, you and all three of us, I think, but Dan and I obviously work quite closely together, and I think you're hugely passionate about what you do. You really want to make a difference to people's lives, and obviously you use your own experience with diet and obviously healthcare and everything else to improve people's outcomes. And obviously I'm the same. We're both very passionate about what we do, and therein lies the point, doesn't it? And people have to be passionate about. If you're passionate about your work, it's not work.
Exactly.
It's just life.
I mean,
no?
I'm so grateful that you asked this question, because I don't know if
we're doing well.
he knows me well enough, probably, that I don't believe in work-life balance at all. Life is life.
Absolutely.
Wherever you are, you're living your life, and it's a misnomer to give people another thing to do. So what you do is you tell the human, get work-life balance. No, life is life. You're wherever you are, you're living it. Now, we're very lucky. I'm very, very fortunate. But I had to hit rock bottom to know what it was like to be at the top. And what I mean at the top is living the life that I want, doing what I want, and supporting people to not suffer as much as they were doing. That's my passion. And so I do that with an ease. And so what I'm always doing, in fact, is trying to create my so-called work life to completely marry with who I am.
So what was different though before? Because you're still a psychotherapist. You're still in the same line of work.
To be honest with you, I still felt like I had the most privileged job in the world. I really did love it. But I would have been one of those people that were going, where is the work-life balance? Where is it? Where is it? And and I'm a single mum, and there is no balance. If my kids need me, that's first. So priorities come. But I just think, wouldn't it be lovely if we did live in a world where people live their life, and we're not looking at.
We're delving into socio-economic issues and things there, I think, as well, aren't we? If we go into too much depth. One thing I would say is, sometimes I think there's a lack of. I think it's particularly young people these days. People watching might know I work quite closely with young people as well, and from a motivational perspective, a girl I met not too long ago knew her boyfriend from working behind a bar that I like to go to. And she was really stressed and everything else. She didn't like her job. She worked in a call centre. There was nothing wrong with working in a call centre, but she hated the job. She didn't like it, she hated it. And she always wanted to work in beauty therapy, and she liked, you know, massaging and all that sort of stuff is what she wanted to get into. And I told her just quit a job. I said, my advice is quit your job. But what am I going to do afterwards? Well, if you don't have a job, you'll be motivated to get one. Just quit it. If it's causing you this much pain and you're unhappy in it, quit it. Don't do it. Now, a lot of people would say that's the wrong advice to give. Now, she did quit a job, and 2 days later I was there, and a family member came and had a go at me, but was that's poor advice, because now she's not got a job, she's not earning any money. But a week later she'd enrolled on a course and everything else, and now she's a full-time qualified masseuse, and she's doing what she loves doing. Now, it's not all down to me, it took her to do it, but you know, basically my advice was, don't do something you don't love doing. We all have to do things we don't enjoy from time to time, but as long as your end goal is to do what makes you happy, because happiness is the key, right? Is it not?
I think it's
a good debate.
Absolutely, but my thoughts on this would, if your working life puts you in a persistent state of stress, that's not right. Okay? If you are fearing going to work every morning because you actively dislike your colleagues, the work you do, you know, it doesn't fit with who you are and your core values as a person, you're not making progress on what you want to do in your life, it's incredibly difficult and incredibly damaging for people.
It is, isn't it?
In the long term. And I think
it weakens.
And I think this plays into the idea of burnout. You know, it then, you know, maybe something else happens in your life, and you know, you're someone who's then very highly at risk of that, really. If you're being worn down emotionally and physically, physiologically, because of the hormones. So it's not stress, and this idea of stress, it's not just how you feel, it's physiological changes within your body which are damaging you. You know, then you become very at risk. And whilst we talk about that you can tolerate things and dig deep for a while, you can't do that year in, year out. Eventually, depending on your individual tolerance, something will crack in your life.
Yeah.
The stress is a broad term, isn't it? Like you say, it's not just a mental thing, it's a physiological thing as well.
Yeah, it's mostly physiological, actually. The changes are so profound, but again, it's something that we think is quite normal. You know, it's normal to have palpitations, it's normal to have anxiety. Is it? And like Dan's saying, if what you're doing on a daily basis is creating your whole system to be on hyper alert, that's not a natural state to live within. That's a state that should be every now and again.
I agree with you. You just mentioned anxiety there, and anxiety is something that, personal reasons, one way or another, there's more and more people I know who seem to be suffering with anxiety, people that I wouldn't necessarily, like myself even to a certain point, in times gone by. But it's a term that is now more openly, commonly used and referred to, and I think there's obviously more understanding there. But more and more people seem to be, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, anxious, especially young people.
Yeah.
In your professional experience, why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say 90% of the people that I work with have some kind of anxiety.
Because anxiety isn't just one thing either, there's lots of different anxiety
disorders.
disorders.
No, it's like depression. There's not one depression, there's depressions, that's what I call it, because there's different ways it manifests.
Yeah.
I believe it's because we've divorced ourselves so much from our humanness in order to cope with this particularly Western world, that we're not operating as we were born to operate. And that's why I kind of smiled when you said it's about being happy. Well, actually it's about having the full range of human emotion, and that we roll with them. So if there's 10 emotions, we should have 10 emotions. Sure. And that if we decide that only one is palatable to us, we're creating suffering straight away, because nobody's happy every single moment of every day, right? Yeah. So I mean, that's where we have to be really careful around positive psychology and positive mindset and all of that, because actually what that does is deems the human to be quite a lot of the time
so makes that in itself makes us inhuman.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So you know, which is the work that I do, to bring humanity back to the human as a something that's absorbed as the person, not as a concept.
I mean, anxiety, you know, is that, like you say, the modern world in which we live in is not necessarily conducive to a healthy human being, is what we say at Primal Cure, one way or another, whether it be diet and whether it be lifestyle. Something I see a lot of is obviously social media. Social media has a a lot of fantastic attributes, but it also has, in my opinion, a lot of dangerous ones.
Yes, it certainly does. Well, we were talking earlier about the embarrassment and humiliation. The most feared thing, well, there's two feared things the human being has. One is grief, and one is humiliation. So grief, because it's the most painful emotion that you can have, because it means a loss of something that you can't have back. And humiliation is every single human being fears being embarrassed or humiliated in front of another human being. And I use this analogy about, if you stub your toe and fall on the floor at home, you just get up, you feel a bit of a plonker and you carry on, right? If you do that in front of an audience of 200 people, completely different, isn't it?
Yeah.
But and I believe that that's because from the times when we were hunting and gathering, we needed to look strong. So
survival of the fittest is
exactly.
Yeah.
So you can't look weak.
Exuding confidence.
You have to exude confidence, and that's what we want to do now. Whereas with social media, we have a lens with us all of the time, and other people have lenses on us also, don't they? So we're not in charge of what gets seen always. And that's,
that can immortalise people in a strange kind of way as well. They're putting out there only what they want people to see, aren't they? I mean, some of the most successful people that some of the most successful people I know, and some of the most, the people who put out the most incredible things on their Instagram feed are actually some of the most miserable. And some of the people who are really struggling at home, they wouldn't necessarily be the people you think about. They might have families, they might be married, they might have kids, they might, on the surface, look like everything's rosy. And do you think social media gives them, is that their own personal way of reinforcing that everything's okay even when it's not?
Absolutely. Well, it's the same principle, isn't it? Let's feed the world these images and look what a fantastic life I'm having, and therefore almost muddying the mind of the opposition in a way. If you think of it in a kind of primal way.
Yeah. And for young people in particular, I mean, young people of the future, and it really worries me actually, social media, that especially young girls, I think they're constantly comparing themselves to and guys as well. It works both ways, but I think more so young girls, because there's so many different facets of it. Whether it be comparing themselves to fashion, whether somebody looks, whether somebody's fat, whether somebody's thin. What kind of, in the work that you do, let's say, do you deal with people where you can see that that there's been a direct correlation to their mental state of mind when they come, when they come to you? Let's say they've grown, it's had obviously a domino effect, if you like, and that's largely down to their state of mind now when they come to the...
Yeah, well, definitely people are acutely aware, they think they're acutely aware of what other people are thinking of them, but that's constructed within ourselves too, right? Because we can't ever
Nobody knows what everybody's thinking of you.
Even if you ask somebody, they'll give you another answer, right? So, I love the quote that, like, what other people are thinking is none of your business, right?
It's great.
But actually, it's true. The only thing you can control, and you don't have very much control of that, is how you think about yourself. But more importantly, how you relate to yourself.
Yeah.
That's the most control you'll ever have. The longest relationship you'll ever have with anybody is the one with yourself. So build that one.
Sure.
And then you've got a really good chance of staying well and happy if that's your bag.
No. Talk to me a little bit about burnout. Define, to me it's pretty obvious, but to anybody that's not familiar, how do you define burnout?
Well, I define it as burnout trauma, is what I call it now, because burnout tends to be batted around a little bit as though it's somebody needing a holiday. And I know that I see people in their worst place, so I do see the people that are completely broken down. But burnout trauma is really where somebody's faculties, their physical and mental health, every single system has
cracked.
Ruptured or cracked, So the main features of it are that they don't recognise themselves anymore.
Sure.
They can't hold a thought together like they used to. They can't function like they used to. They don't care like they used to. And so those, if somebody who's incredibly bright or just whatever they do, they can't do now.
They can't measure up against who they were.
Exactly. So it's a real rupture in everything they know, and that's burnout. So you can have somebody who perhaps would fly around the world for business, and now they can't get off the sofa for 6 months, and that's a very real.
Yeah.
That's very, very real. That I hear that again and again.
Right.
And it's quite interesting because it's important that people have that time because their brain has created this breakdown in order to save itself in a way.
Sure.
So they need to be at home. They can't not be at home to start with, but they need to be able to repair in order to recover in the long term.
Really, some of the most distressing consultations I've had, and well, in terms of the amount of obvious distress.
Yeah.
Somebody walking into the room, you know, they've usually been basically shoved in there by a relative, and they're just in floods of tears, and actually can barely hold a thought process together.
Wow.
And it's so distressing to see someone like that, really. But thankfully I only see it, you know, every occasionally, and there seems to be quite a common pattern that I see, which is, you know, there's somebody in the corporate world who has been in a certain job role for a number of years. Redundancies have started to happen, increased pressure on the workplace. Other staff members have gone, I don't like this, I'm going to leave, or they've gone off sick and they've not come back. Increased pressure, and the pressure just builds up and up and up to a point where they have nowhere to go with it, really.
So they've been riding so high, riding the crest of a wave, as it were, and then it comes crashing down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How do we help people in that situation?
Yeah, good question.
Well, this comes to one of my passions, which is to work preventatively.
Yes, so in terms of prevention,
Yeah,
before they get to you.
We absolutely have to educate people about being fully human. And I believe that everybody comes out of childhood with an emotional template. And if there's 10 emotions, we often come out of childhood with 2 or 3 that are acceptable to us. So, and that's that's not a blame thing. It's just a reason. So let's imagine you've got a CD that gets imprinted in childhood, and your family they're okay with angry, happy only.
You're always going to be happy or angry.
But all the others, you're still having them, but you disallow them, and actually that weakens the system. So it's
effectively creates a personality disorder, does it not? It can do.
Not as profoundly as that, but yes, it creates suffering because let's say you disallow jealousy, for instance, which is a normal emotion. Jealousy is really taboo in this country, particularly. So, but all jealousy is somebody's got something that you'd like, right? That's all right. It's quite childlike, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
That person's got a toy and I'd like it. That's okay. It matters if you're going to go and smack somebody in the face about it, right? That's what matters to us. But actually the emotion is okay, because all emotion is transient, all feelings are transient, unless you disallow them.
Of course.
Right? And that's then when they become entrenched. So I think there's a way of strengthening the human, making them more resilient by helping them understand they to be fully human, you have all feelings, and to build a companionable, kindly relationship with yourself so that you stop falling out with yourself and you can't let yourself down. Now, that doesn't mean to say to live without conscience, but it's true responsibility because you're prepared to face who you are and who you're not.
And some people are afraid to do that, aren't they? Well, that's the problem.
Well, of course we are, but we're afraid because we haven't got the companionability in first. Now, and this is why sometimes things like mindfulness has scared people massively, and people have had anxiety attacks during mindfulness because what they're told to do is, go into yourself and find out about yourself. But if they're full of self-hatred before they start looking, and they don't like what they find, what actually happens is there's a snowball effect that the hatred becomes up. So the work that I do with people and organisations is to put the companionship in first. Then you can look.
Then they've got the support.
Because you're not going to beat yourself up for what you find.
Yeah.
We're all warts and all, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've all done stuff we're not proud of. Probably continue to do so. Right? But if we keep holding that against ourselves, then we start to impact the world for the worse, and it weakens us.
I think it's interesting. You talk obviously about, but you've had your own. You've had your own experiences, haven't you? That have I guess inspired you to come up with these concepts and things. Do you mind talking about those?
Not at all. No.
So just talk for people. Obviously, PTSD is something that you post-traumatic stress syndrome. For those who aren't familiar, PTSD is obviously an area that you specialise in or have specialised in, and then of course you found out, obviously through your own personal experience, that you were suffering PTSD.
Yeah.
Talk to people a little bit about that.
Oh yes, this was, I mean, the irony is not lost, is it?
No.
So I was 18 years into my practice as a psychotherapist, and a trauma happened to me, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to use your time. But I found myself, in the moment, I was one of those people where I'd got worn out by a drip effect of stress, and then I was assaulted, and within 12 hours of that.
By somebody in a position of trust as well.
Exactly, so that's mind-boggling in itself. I think that was massively part of it. And also, I trusted myself to be all right. I thought, I was made of strong stuff as well. And I think a lot to do with the rupture for me and the PTSD for me was the level of shame that I felt.
Sure.
But once I got over that and I started to work on, if I need to recover from this, because I was absolutely convinced I was gone.
Right.
I was convinced I would never ever recover. And I would say, on the whole, I'm a positive thinker and I just love life, I'm that kind of person. But my goodness, did I think negatively? Because hundreds of times a day I'd go, I never recover this, I'll never recover. And then one day I was like, well, of course you'll never recover if you're saying that to yourself 100 times a day.
What was the trigger? Like, what made you sort of, was it just literally just woke up with a different frame of mind one day, or?
Literally.
Yeah.
I woke up and I stood, I can remember where I was standing, and I put my hands out like this and I go, right, okay, Anna, come on then. So you're going to take this one and you're going to convince yourself you'll never recover, because you absolutely won't if you continue down that path, or are you going to find the other way? And I didn't know what the other way was, by the way. I was still in the tunnel without an ending.
Martin Luther King says that faith is taking the first step when you don't see the whole staircase.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
But I thought, well, I'm not going to live this way. I'm not going to live it convincing myself that I won't recover. So I'll just take the next step.
Sure.
And then what occurred to me was, if that's not working and I'm brutalising myself every single day, then
what have you got to lose?
What's the exact opposite of that? What's the exact opposite to brutalising myself and beating myself up?
Yeah.
It's being kind to myself and companionable. So I was like, well, I'll try that then. I didn't believe myself, by the way. I just thought, well, nonsense. But I took a vow to myself and I said, I'm going to do this from this day forward. This is what I literally said out loud. Yeah. I will never brutalise myself. I will never beat myself. I will never demean myself. Yeah, bearing in mind how embarrassed I was, and I really did think that. Were you embarrassed because given your status and your position and your job, your profession, or just your own sort of willpower and your own pride? I think it was more to do with my children in a way. I couldn't feel it for myself because I felt such an idiot at first. I felt it for my children, and that kind of woke me up. I felt ashamed that I hadn't thoroughly looked after them. So. But I kind of borrowed that as my motivation, that if that's not going to work... Turn the negative into a positive. Yeah, really on purpose though. Like I had to commit to creating new neural pathways. Like I knew that I was wiring, right? I knew that my circuit board needed rewiring, and you have to work like Billio to do it. Sure. But once you've done it, you don't go back. No. You can remember doing it the other way, but you can't do it, and that's why I'm so at ease now, is because I remember talking to myself like that, but I don't do it anymore. Dan, I'm intrigued actually, because obviously you lost a tremendous amount of weight. Yeah. Now, losing a lot, is it 5 stone you lost?
Yeah,
5
stone. 5 stone, yeah.
That's a lot of weight. So losing weight is one thing, and it's great, you've obviously done fantastically well to get to where you are now, and you're a fantastic advert, but at the same time, psychologically, that must have had, in the position you were in then, and also going through that process to get to that point, you must have had your own sort of trauma, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to compare the trauma I had to Anna's trauma. They're completely different. Yeah. But they're both stories of, we were both in positions of, I'm a doctor, and I was, obese, not just overweight. I was firmly in the obese category and felt completely powerless about it, really.
Were you embarrassed by that?
Yeah, I was completely embarrassed, because how are you going to be, I really do believe, and I believe this passionately now, that we should be living, what we do, and actually, how can you go and see a doctor about your health when the doctor is clearly not got
Visibly
a handle
not
on
practicing what he's
theirs.
preaching,
And you know,
yeah.
there is, of course, you know, there's certain illnesses and stuff that you know you can't have that sort of control over.
Of course.
But my weight was one that I did,
Yeah.
or I certainly felt like I should be able to have control over. But I did feel completely out of control. And you know, as many of the viewers will know, that you know, my story came about not because of me suddenly gaining some sense of control. It was that I learnt a different way, which is the primal way.
Yeah.
You know, a low carbohydrate diet was what really worked for me, and still does to this day, and I live it every day now. However, you know, I did feel completely embarrassed in that moment. But it's really interesting what you said about, you know, that day waking up and deciding, because one of the things that I'm always trying to find out, and whenever I try to find, whenever I hear somebody's story of where their life has changed, I love to find out what was the trigger, because you know what we're doing here is all about trying to help people to get better health.
Yeah, of course.
And we really need to understand what's the trigger. Okay, so what?
I have a view of that actually, and what I say to other people is, you need to find your internal line. And it's very hard to create that line for somebody else. But when I say that to people, when you find your line, and sometimes it is simply because we're sick of ourselves, right? We're sick of how we think, we're sick about what's going on, right? You just can't, that your internal line is just, I'm done. And that's where I got to. It was just a moment. And I say to people now, you'll do it when you're ready. And that's very empowering, because I don't want them to do it when I'm ready for them, right? I would take their suffering away immediately if I could, right? But when I say that, people go, oh, so I'm going to be ready at some point. They can't feel it, because you can't feel it when you're in it. But when you're ready, it will happen.
Sure.
That's why phrases like pull yourself together and man up is one of the ones.
That's a nice one. That's a lovely one.
Particularly,
the man up one.
Yeah, been particularly obviously is a very big one that's been in the press and that recently about in terms of mental health awareness and stuff.
Which one's that?
Things like man up and pull yourself together and these kind of things. They're so useless because someone's not in that. Well, certainly because they're wrong on so many levels, but also because if someone's not willing at a point where they want to change, then there's no point in you know, trying to force someone into that situation. We see it with smokers and that all the time, just to take it to a different parallel. But you know, if somebody comes into me as a doctor and they're a smoker, you know, one of the temptations would be, you must stop smoking. Look, it's really bad for you. There's X, Y, and Z reasons and that why you should, you know, and it's printed on every cigarette packet. It's not a secret that smoking is bad for you, but if someone's not at that point where they're ready to change,
it's ready, isn't it?
There is no point in badgering them with a load of facts because they're not going to do it.
Want to change,
They're not going to do it. So
and
actually,
they have to be ready.
Yeah.
So actually, in a way, somebody can want to change but not be ready for it yet. Right? As I suspect you have people coming in going, oh, I want to do this, but then they haven't found their internal line, and nobody can give them that. But how cool is it to be able to say to somebody, that line's in you.
Yeah.
You just got to see it and feel it. That for me, it was a feeling.
Yeah.
I didn't kind of intellectualize it. I was just like, boom, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
So it was much more an emotional thing, and that's hard to dish out, isn't it?
It is very much so. I think it's not plain sailing. It's definitely, well, basically it's not one size fits all.
True, absolutely.
It's all very unique.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, relating it to myself in a different way, obviously, you know, different kinds of traumas. Obviously, as a cancer survivor, I remember being diagnosed with cancer and I dealt with it in a certain way. I was very combative by nature as a fighter, as an athlete. But I think but I didn't really struggle with that process because I kind of kicked myself in on a certain path and gave myself a certain direction and gave myself a certain motivation. And the only time I did struggle, speaking openly, was probably when you say that line, when I made a few mistakes, and some big mistakes for me personally. I didn't recognise myself. And I was like, oh, that's not something I would do. You know, why have I done that? And it's only in retrospect that I realised certain things that, you know, I'd made decisions that weren't true to myself, and then you have to address them. But it's only as a result of consequence that I got to that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In my own personal experience. What can we do in terms of diet? And I mean, how important is, living the right, sleeping right, for example? Like we talk about, but specifics now. We've talked about, balance, if you like, but it's just life. We all agree on that, really.
Yeah.
But in terms of diet, lifestyle, environment, those three key principles that we always talk about here at Primal Cure, Dan. What do we need to do, Anna? How do we realign those things to give ourselves, our best sort of mental state of mind?
Well, in a way, I think it's the problem around diet and lifestyle is almost like an externalization of what's going on inside people. So actually, in some ways, people are combative with their life, aren't they?
Sure.
They've fallen out with certain foods. I'm going on a diet, or I'm having this, and I'm doing that. And I think that actually that creates a stress in itself. If it's seen as self-care, which is just for looking for life with more ease, I don't think that there needs to be such a fight about it, really. Again, that's another thing I say, look, when you're ready. And I think moderation is really important, but mastering moderation is not easy for human being, right? We tend to like to oscillate. We like to swing from one thing to another, don't we? It's broccoli or it's burger, and there's no in between,
It's not about one or the other.
Don't know where I got that from.
I know.
I like it.
It's a bit of alliteration. That's why.
Yeah, that's what it was. I like that.
Yeah. Carrot or coleslaw.
But it's an interesting point, and it has a point in the work that I do too, because often people can't eat. They can't eat well, so they might do the thing where they'll go for chocolate, or they'll go for a fizzy drink for that quick energy, because they're so broken down, which is fine. I don't want to demonise anybody for doing that. We all have done those things, but if they can start just having sips of water, take a multivitamin, have a few nuts or bits of fruit, just in the palm of their hand, they're not over-faced, and that's the kind of people I'm working with, is that how to get into proper eating again, proper nutrition.
Basically, it's not about instant gratification one way or another, whether it be, there's all sorts of different forms of instant gratification, food just being one of them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a big problem in society these days, actually, instant gratification. We all want something straight away. People are less willing to wait for things and work for things, aren't they? And I think, personally, I don't know about you guys, but something that I'm very guilty of, and perhaps one of the reasons if ever I find myself struggling to, maintain that balance, if you like, and, keep a grip of that line as you refer to it, is because I've not been sleeping right.
Yeah.
How important psychologically, surely as a psychotherapist, how importantly is, you spoke actually to me off camera about, how you were getting no sleep at all. I couldn't believe how little sleep Anna was getting.
That was a long time ago,
Yeah.
but I've only slept through 2 times in 7.5 years.
2 times?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because one of the things that's left with me from the PTSD is my short-term memory is quite shot, and I don't sleep through. I rarely sleep through. I read a lot.
Right, okay.
So that's a good thing.
So you have broken sleep, or you just sleep and then you wake up? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I might wake up 4 or 5 times in the night.
So how much sleep do you get?
Well, I try to give myself enough of a window to get enough.
Gotcha.
So I'm fairly religious about going to bed. I'm in bed 10:30. Sometimes a tad later, but
the quality of the sleep rather than the amount of sleep that's the problem for you.
Yeah. But it's something that I do feel strongly about, and I understand. But the important thing is to not get stressed about it. I think is just is allow it. And in fact, those 2 sleep throughs have been in the last 2 weeks.
Oh wow!
So for me, that's like real progress.
Yeah.
So there's maybe it's going to start changing. But a lot of people that I work with have terrible time sleeping and really internalise that as being something bad about themselves. And they also fret. It's very hard, isn't it, to do a day's work on 4 hours?
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
hard.
Tough.
We've all been there with nights before exams and things, and you worry about not getting enough sleep. It's the very worst thing you can do, but it's also the only thing you can think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you've got to be up early, you're thinking about being up early.
Absolutely.
And it's a nightmare.
And when you're worried about not getting enough sleep, you're worried that they're lying. It's this vicious cycle. It's so difficult to break. I see so many people coming in to request medication to help that. And it's a very, very difficult situation.
We don't want to be in that position. We don't want to medicate at all if we can help it.
Not at all, no. I mean, the medications that we use in those scenarios are really bad drugs. They're not. They're highly addictive. They, in the longer term, for people who, they cause dementia and cause all sorts of problems. But people feel like they're in such a desperate state trying to get some sleep, and they're worrying so much about their sleep.
Short-term gain can become a long-term problem, can't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I find actually, personally, I juggle a lot. I'm quite busy. I'm still, actively competing and training. And there's times when, I was trying to fit in probably 10 to 12 hours training a week, which for me is what I have to do. And I still do it now, but for a long time I wasn't. It was stagnated, and that would make me stressed because I wasn't doing everything I needed to in that department. But obviously, I'd have to make sure that, working-wise, I was functioning and making sure that I was ticking all those boxes, but I wasn't happy in other areas. And all I needed to do was sleep more. And I basically corrected myself, said, right, James, okay, sort yourself out. So I got into a habit of going to bed at 9 o'clock, getting up at 4, going to the gym early, getting into work before 7, because sometimes I'd have to come back at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And it was just basically just sorting out a pattern that worked for me. But for me, the key was sleep and recovery, because when you are doing a lot, you need more recovery. But the truth is, people who are busy and people who give themselves a lot of responsibility tend not to recover as much as they should.
Well, and busy is not necessarily productive, is it? And that's what, if I can get to bed early, I do. Because then I think, well, if the episodes that I'm awake, it's okay, because in the long run I can, I can function. So it's being able to adjust, and just stressing about it never helps.
Have you got one final message that you could leave with people who are perhaps are struggling a little bit and feel that they may be burning out or on the cusp of burning out?
Yes, I think. Yeah, it's hard to have a final message, I think, but if I would say it's never too late to start looking after yourself. It's never too late.
That's very true.
Even if you've had the break and the rupture, physically and mentally, the moment you start putting yourself first for a change is the start of everything.
Sure.
Start of the new life.
Yeah.
So, I'd say that it's never too late.
That really goes across everything we do, and we see so many common recurring themes about what we do: sleep, stress, stressing less, exercising more, all those kind of things. It's never too late to do any of those things and start caring for yourself. In life in general.
It's something we talk about a lot, isn't it? Lifestyle medicine, basically. That's the key. Guys, that's all we've got time for now. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Dan and to Anna, especially. Thank you so much, Anna, for talking to us. It's been fascinating.
Thanks.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching us now. Keep watching the videos. Thank you for joining us.